Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Neon and welcome back to another benchmarking video. In today's video, we'll be checking out how well Tornado Research and Rescue runs on some older hardware. This time we'll be benchmarking both the GTX 1060 3GB and the Ryzen 5 1400. If you enjoy this type of content or find it useful, a subscribe to the channel would be greatly appreciated. Anyways, before we get into it, I'm going to go into a little more detail about the PC we'll be using. So the GTX 1060 3GB is specifically the EVGA model. This graphics card came out in like 2016, I believe in August, so it's almost 10 years old at this point. Apart from that, the graphics card itself has 1152 cores, 72 TMUs, and 48 ROPs. This is also the 3GB model, the GDDR5 one. I'm saying this to avoid confusion because there also is a 6GB version of this. But yeah, now time for the CPU. So of course we're using the Ryzen 5 1400. At this point, it's a fairly old first-gen Ryzen chip, but it can still definitely game. This is a 65-watt CPU. It also has 4 cores and 8 threads. Oh, and on top of that, it also has a turbo clock speed of 3.4 GHz. Also, it can be overclocked, but for the purposes of this video, it is completely stock. Other than that, the game is stored on an SSD and the computer has 16GB of DDR4 memory. Okay, now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and get straight into it. Alright, so starting off at the ultra settings, as we spawn into the map, we're already at 100% utilization from the GPU, and we're almost at that 3GB VRAM limit, so if you guys were to have the 6GB version of the 1060, I bet you'd get a couple extra FPS. And because of all that, as you guys can see on the top left, the Ryzen 5 1400 is barely doing anything at all, rarely exceeding 10% utilization. On top of that, we're using less than 8GB of RAM, so that's actually pretty impressive. Anyways, we're getting an average frame rate of 11 with 1% lows of 4.9 and 0.1% lows of 4.8 FPS. Moving on to the high settings, we basically double our overall FPS, making this a lot smoother. 1060 is still at 100% utilization most of the time, but we are using a little bit less VRAM too. The Ryzen 5 1400 is also working a little harder now the usage ranging from 10 to 20%. But for the most part, the RAM usage stayed mostly the same. Anyways, we're getting an average frame rate of 20.2 with 1% lows of 9.7 and 0.1% lows of 8.8 FPS. Okay, so now we are on the medium settings, and yeah, at this point I'd consider the game completely playable because we are hitting that 30 FPS milestone and it's pretty consistent for the most part. Of course, the GPU is at 100% utilization, the CPU is still not doing much, but the RAM usage is still fairly low. So now at the medium settings, I'd say you can play the game at 1080p no problem if you don't mind playing at like a lower frame rate, I guess. But anyways, we got an average frame rate of 30.3 with 1% lows of 13.4 and 0.1% lows of 12.2 FPS. Moving on to the low settings at 1080p, we don't actually gain as many FPS as you might think. We really only gain about 3 to 5 FPS, and of course the frame rate is more stable and less stuttery. The 1060 is still at mostly around 90 to 100% utilization, and the CPU is hovering around 10 to 20%. RAM usage is still below 8GB, and we got an average frame rate of 35.1 with 1% lows of 13.7 and 0.1% lows of 9.9 FPS. Also, just as a side note, but the 0.1% lows of 9.9 was most likely caused by a tornado lag spike, so it might actually be an outlier. Alright, so now if we turn the resolution down to 720p, we get a pretty decent overall boost to our FPS. Also, you may have noticed, but I decided to leave the tornado quality at medium because when you put it on low, you can barely see the tornado. It just kind of looks like a funnel in the sky. Anyways, now we're in the upper 40s in terms of like FPS, and due to the game's resolution change, the Ryzen 5 1400 has to work a little harder now. This is because the lower the resolution is, the more CPU intensive a game typically becomes. Also, in case you haven't noticed, the GTX 1060 is still mostly completely being utilized at 90 to 100%. Now we're getting an average of 47.2 FPS with 1% lows of 20.6 and 0.1% lows of 17.1. And lastly, we are now running the game at all low settings except for the tornado quality, which is set at medium at 360p, which is the lowest resolution that you can go with the in-game menu. The Ryzen 5's overall usage jumped to around 20 to 30% utilization most of the time, and the GTX 1060 is still being maxed out as well. The RAM usage has stayed the same as all their tests, and this time the FPS effectively doubled it. Now we're getting an average of 85.3 FPS with 1% lows of 39.1 and 0.1% lows of 35 FPS. Anyways, that is all for today's video, so if you enjoyed this type of content or found it useful, subscribe for more as I'll be trying to post a bit more from now on. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.